Hey, how's it going, everyone? Sorry for the little bit of delay there. This is your instructor, Tom Berry, just going to provide kind of an overview over chapters 3, 4, and 5, week 2. Kind of talk about the assignment a little bit. My goal will be to keep these about 15, 20 minutes. Just give you a little bit of background information, a little bit of context, and hopefully that'll be kind of reinforcing, helpful for you to kind of wrap your head around the chapters for the week. As always, if you have any questions, drop me an email. I'd be more than happy to set up one-on-one Zoom meetings as well. All right, so with that, I'm kind of going to jump back and forth. I'm going to share a screen, kind of jump back and forth between the PowerPoint and some ideas. I'm going to put the PowerPoint, also make it available to you. Make it available to you in Blackboard, so I'll make a note of that as well. All right, so here you can look at a couple different diagrams here, thinking about, so we'll actually go back. So think about these chapters, looking about culture, socialization. We're looking at basically developing a sense of meaning. Like, how do we develop meaning, understanding? What are some of the ways in which our views of the world are shaped? And to do this, we get into the cultural experience, and then we get into the social experience as well. This right here is kind of just a couple different images, ideas. This is when I was traveling in Germany a few years ago. Thought this was super interesting, super funny. This is a one-night stand. Hopefully you can see that, this one-night stand. And with this one, yeah, it's basically about safe sex, taking precautionary measures. And I just found it super fun, fun-spirited way, cartoon way, sort of talking about safe sex. And that would just be not something that I would expect to see in the United States. And we have different sensibilities regarding sexuality and about talking about sexuality. And I mean, it comes through and is expressed in culture for sure. This is basically, this would be my uncles, my dad's side, my mom's side. What he's doing there is he's shucking corn. This is how my dad, when he was a kid, and this is how they harvested corn. And actually, my uncle and my cousin are getting ready for the corn shucking competition they do every year. And then my cousin and my uncle are former national champions of corn shucking. Here's the combine. This is all GPS. You can't see it, but it's all GPS driven. It can be a driverless combine now. So we're talking about basically within, I don't know, 1.5 generations, the amount of technology, the degree to which technology has facilitated change, super powerful. So examining culture is to examine not only kind of the things that shape the ways that we think and the ways that we know. So culture is being reflected in the signs and sort of the way that we symbolically communicate the world. Also, we can kind of look at technology and the way that technology shapes culture and society itself as an important element. This one here is just about trying to get at, Oregon and being, having a, not being able to pump your own gas or having people pump your gas. Very central, very Oregonian, or if you're from New Jersey. In the PowerPoint, there's this video on food around the world. I think it's really cool to look at food. Food as being an expression of culture and how we think about food. What these two authors do is they go around the world documenting the food that people eat. And not only the cost of the food, the type of food. This is a high income industrialized society, right? This is the United States. A lot of prepackaged food, a lot of fresh food, middle income country, a lot of family members, extended families, all nuclear family. So, who are we eating with and where do we eat? This is also part of what they're documenting. There's this TED Talk, which is super, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, kind of interesting. Examination of food from around the world and how food and culture are interactive. It's worth the watch. Check it out if you can. Part of the terminology of thinking about cultural ethnocentrism. So we tend to view the world through the lens of our own experience. So that's this idea that we tend to view and judge people from other countries, people from other places based on our own cultural lens. And so that's, and we provide that judgment. Part of that ethnocentrism is part of that judgment that comes along with that. We view the world through our own lens and tend to judge people or judge other cultures based on our cultural framework. Cultural relativism is about trying to understand culture from the viewpoint of people from that culture, right? So it's trying to understand from an insider's point of view. So kind of go back to this chart here for a second and think about this example of teeth chiseling versus white teeth. So this video here, short video, practice in Indonesia. In Indonesia, where in that culture, some people have their teeth chiseled to be like this, and it's a sign of status, of elevated status. It's a positive thing, sign of positive regard. And for us, straight white teeth, that's like, a modern day world, a modern industrial post-industrial world. This is sort of, straight white teeth is something that we view very positively. So I think the importance there is that, looking at culture, right? So we avoid, if we're ethnocentric, we look at those, chiseling teeth. We'd view it through our own cultural lens, be disgusted, view that as being vile, bad, all that kind of stuff. And then to be relativistic is try to understand, like, where does that come from? How do people in their own culture see that particular practice? That'd be much more from that relativistic viewpoint. I mean, culture is fascinating, right? The more you study cultures from around the world, the more you're kind of understanding not only that other culture, but gaining a better appreciation of your own culture. So the assignment for the week, let me kind of go back to sharing the screen. The assignment for the week is to read this article in Blackboard. I'll kind of give it away, the trick. This is American backwards. And in that article, what this person does, they describe kind of American culture or an aspect of an American culture, and they just describe it. You don't know that you're reading about Americans, right? So they're very, very descriptive, just describing culture, describing this particular unique culture. And what you're going to do is basically do the same thing, but talk about, let's see, it's called Oregon Backwards. Oregon Backwards. It's Nogaro. So I want you to write up something short on Nogaro, take something going on in a community in Oregon and describe it from an outsider viewpoint. Like, how might an outsider describe a particular practice, idea, sort of an aspect of Oregon or Central Oregon culture? So that's going to be the write-up. That's the assignment for the week. You're going to provide some reflection on that, and that's going to actually also be part of the discussion board for the week as well. All right, so continue on thinking about a couple of different other things. When we're looking at culture, we're looking at sometimes the physical culture, the material culture, things like a watch, right? All these different expressions of culture. And they become, each one of them has a story to tell. I mean, all these different aspects of culture, there's a story behind it. Not only the creators of that, but its place within culture, the meaning of these particular things, its function, its use. How does it illustrate or reflect things that are going on in culture, right? Thinking about this, when I was a kid growing up, you actually had garbage collectors. People would come by your curbside, and they'd throw trash into your, into the big dumpster. Now everything's mechanical. I mean, that's an expression of culture. So the study of material culture is a study of society, a study of culture itself. We study signs, religious signs. What do those signs mean? Think about these signs from different viewpoints. We think about how culture gets diffused, how things move across cultures. That's diffusion, cultural diffusion. So baseball, for example, baseball was a practice started in the United States, but it's been diffused throughout the world, throughout most of the world. So that's a diffusion thing. Actually, baseball is built on cricket. So, English, the Britons, colonizing America and brought the practice of cricket. Cricket turns into baseball. Baseball becomes diffused throughout a large part of the world. Cultural leveling has to do with things become more homogenous. So as more culture is shared across nations, things get leveled or more homogenous, more similar. Imperialism, cultural imperialism is about domination. So it's about devaluing unique aspects of a particular culture and colonizing another nation based on a dominant culture and a dominant nation. So the United States is in a position oftentimes of culturally imperializing other nations and other countries. Hollywood and film, and a lot of industries in the culture industries are moving into other countries, and it's imperializing or colonizing these other places. Transnational corporations, McDonald's, franchises, all these different kind of things. It's about cultural imperialism. This is kind of fun little, short little video about the history of the high five. Kind of an interesting thing. It's about trying to get at here is about not only understanding that history, I think is kind of interesting, but also about diffusion that kind of gets diffused in culture. Went from the high five, the fist bump. It's super interesting to start thinking about how does the fist bump, where did it get started? And then think about the ways in which the fist bump has been diffused throughout the world now. That's kind of an expression of how powerfully we are connected. It's super interesting to sort of see it through that particular lens. I'm not sure if the Corona bump is ever going to get diffused, but fist bump for sure. A couple of other things, I don't know, just kind of hit upon to not make this too long. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, language and culture of being interactive. Language and culture are mutually interdependent. You study language, you study a culture. Ideas, an example would be linguistic sexism. So sexism about male domination or one sex dominating over another in terms of language and culture. So I used to say like a fireman, now it's like a police officer, right? So a lot of that linguistic sexism has been removed from our language. There's still aspects of it that are there, but it's been some of that's been largely removed. So we study language to study culture. So Latinx, so members of the Latinx community. I used to think it was only referring to members of a particular ethnic group or a particular nation. And now I'm aware that not only talk about Latinx as a particular group of people, but also within those Latin American, Central American, South American countries, it's using a gender neutral, or it's using, this is an X chromosome, but all individuals have an X chromosome. What differs males and females is the Y chromosome. So Latinx is this sort of idea is about sharedness. It's about neutrality in terms of language. In Spanish speaking, and so for language, an adjective to talk about somebody who's tall is alto for masculine form, alta for feminine form. It's even moving in Central and South American countries to say, like a person, una persona, in mi clase, a student in my class, is tall. If I was telling somebody that without trying to designate male or female, I mean, in the past, a person might have said, una persona en mi clase, a student in my class, es muy alto, is very tall. Now it's like, okay, a student in mi clase is muy altex, without, so it's not identifying, there's no need to identify the gender of the individual. So that becomes like this sort of transformation of language. Super cool to examine language and culture kind of issues. Here's some different examples of the way, just sort of demonstrating that language and culture are interactive and that we view kind of the world through a lens of language. Same object, same person could be a victim or a survivor. The language that we use to describe that person or that person describe themselves shapes how they may view not only themselves, but also the world. This one here, I was in a class in graduate school. A person didn't speak a lot throughout the course of the term. For us, in our way that we, in our culture, we view somebody who's really quiet as someone who's shy. It's almost like a negative, a negative. And so somebody in my class said to her, "Why are you so shy? You don't hardly say anything in class. Why are you so shy?" And her response was that it's not that I'm shy, it's that I'm not afraid to be quiet. And I was just like, wow, it's super powerful. I mean, we're talking about the same reality, but different ways of describing that. So language becomes this interesting world of examining language to understand culture, but also how language is a filter of how we view the world as well. I'm going to kind of fast forward through a couple things. I mean, one thing to think about too is sort of thinking about these different ways to think about theoretically, to think about culture. From a functionalist viewpoint, culture gives people guidance, direction. It's a way to communicate values of a group, of a nation. So every nation has a national flag. It's important to develop nation. You need to have symbols to create common core values, to reinforce them, and to establish some sense of connectivity and unity. Conflict theory views culture sometimes as an area of, as where inequality gets expressed, where power, demonstration of power gets expressed. So the correct Confederate flag is a symbol of white supremacy. It's been used as a symbol of white supremacy. It's not to say that there's not maybe different meanings, but from a conflict theory viewpoint, I mean, that's a very powerful meaning of the Confederate flag. It's a way of reinforcing white supremacy. Symbolic interactionism is the way that we define. It's the way in which both the symbols create culture and also reflect culture itself. And it's part also the interactionism is about how we assign meaning to, to culture. So Black Lives Matter, for example, all of us may have different ways in which we think about Black Lives Matter, how we define it, how we understand it. Part of interactionism is how do we come to understand a particular symbol? What's the meaning? And how does that meaning change across time and place? I don't know, kind of jump into like this concept and kind of maybe leave it for this for now. Social construction of reality is, we'll use this concept throughout the term. And basically it's to say that reality, like the world that we see, not the objective reality, but the world that we see, is socially constructed. And so we kind of work through the definition and give you a couple different examples. So from a social construction perspective, the meaning that we give things is arbitrary. There's no real reason why we give anything any particular meaning. So that meaning is a social and cultural product. So race is a social construct. Race is not determined by biology, and this will make sense later on when we talk about race in this class. But race is not determined by biology. It's a human, humans created, categories of race that are fundamentally a human creation. So it can be socially constructed, but it's very real in the sense that that's how we come to define it. And therefore we kind of follow through, our actions follow those meanings. So if we define it that race is biology, we start to view the world through that lens. And sometimes our actions, our behavior, all the way to macro level policies may be predicated upon these biological definitions. And man, it can be hard to change. It's like for people to recognize in a society, to recognize how things are socially constructed can be very difficult because because people get, just sort of habituated into thinking about things in particular ways. And to think in a different way, to think about how that might be socially constructed can be very disruptive for some. Like, it's like very challenging to think about how something may be kind of constructed. The Thomas theorem is that if you define it as real, it's real in its consequences. So, if we see the world through a particular way, we act towards the world in that way. So it becomes real in its consequences. So race is a social construct, but if we define it as biological, it's real in its consequences because we act as if it were true that way. This is lab-grown meat. So if I were to call it lab-grown meat and you were to go to the store and say, hey, here's a package of lab-grown meat, you probably wouldn't buy it. If I would just say this is environmentally enhanced, environmentally protected beef, that may be different, right? So the language is constructing the meaning that we're giving things. Leg hair, this is a short video on a woman talking about not shaving her leg hair and the freedom and the autonomy and sort of that idea. A lot of culture being operated here, the meaning that the construction of meaning of body hair. It's all construction stuff. And then finally, this idea of fairness, I want to kind of end with this, is that in Finland tend to define fair as in a different way than we do in the United States. So in Finland and other Norwegian countries and other European countries, the speeding ticket, the fine for a speeding ticket is contingent upon, or it's influenced by your income bracket. So the more that a person makes, their fine goes up. So higher the fine, you make more, you pay more. And in Finland and other European countries, they view that as fair. That if a person made $100,000 a year, that they're speeding, going over the speed limit by 20 miles an hour. So is a person who's making $50,000 a year, the person's going 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, both 20 miles an hour over. But the person who made $100,000 a year may pay twice the amount in terms of a fine. For us, from our cultural viewpoint, we would view that as unfair, that would be penalizing people who earn more. We'd view that as being very unfair. So it's powerful, right? That we view fairness, and it'd be like, it's almost like instinctual. Like it just like, we would see that idea that doubling the fine for someone who made more as being a violation of something fundamental, like almost something that's in our essence of who we are biologically. But that tells us about how etched into our own sense of being that we view something like fairness. And that idea of fairness is super powerful because it starts to shape how we view all kinds of different institutions and view reality itself. Public schools and public institutions. If we view somebody who grows up in a real lower socioeconomic class, that we look at the resources available to that student versus a kid who grows up in a wealthy class, and we look at, okay, let's give the same dollar amount to both those kids for public school. So the state, let's say the state provides X dollar amount, the same dollar amount for both those kids to the public school. Well, that may, from our lens, that's equal, but it's not equitable. We talk about equity oftentimes more today in our language today, talk about equity is something can be equal, but it's not equitable. So same dollar amount to those two kids, those schools based on those two kids is equal, but it's not equitable. The kid in the lower socioeconomic class, to participate in society, to have opportunities down the road, there needs to be more money, more resources available to that kid than to the kid from a wealthy background. So culture is shaping how we're viewing these things in very powerful ways. If you have questions, let me know. If you want to set up a one-on-one Zoom meeting, let me know as well. I hope everything's well with you. Be safe, be well out there. If you have any questions, drop a line. Best wishes to you, and have yourself a great day.